morning and welcome. Welcome to all of you this morning. At least it's morning for me. Going live here at 9 o'clock on December 9th with day 9 of Luke a chapter a day. So we will be reading chapter 9. You got it. I'm Brian. I'm the pastor at Christ United Methodist Church here in Waynesboro, PA. And thank you. Thank you for spending some time with me. Maybe you're doing it live, which I know folks have been doing that, and some of you have been watching later, which is great, which is great. Um, if you're just joining us for the first time, you can always catch up on these videos. Yes, it's day 9, but you can go back and watch the other ones. They're here on Facebook, or they're also on our YouTube channel. If you can find them on our YouTube channel or on our website. Our website is umcchrist.org. So you can always go there and catch up on all of the videos from day 1 right through to today, to day 9. But So thank you for that. As I've mentioned before, and I'll say it again, Luke has 24 chapters in it. So by starting on December 1st, reading one chapter a day. Yeah, some of them are a little bit long, but so what? Even with my commentary, the videos are about a half an hour, maybe a little bit less. So one chapter a day, you can read the entire Gospel of Luke by Christmas Eve. You'll be finishing up on Christmas Eve. So you'll have Luke's entire biography of Jesus in less than a month. Um, so thank you for joining me, and I'm glad that you found this helpful. I've been receiving comments here on the stream. So if you have questions or something, you want to say something, feel free to do that. I see some folks are already, yes, hearts, wonderful. Um, or you can always shoot me a text so if something comes up to you later. That number is 570-351-1619. I would ask that if you're sending me a text, especially if it's for the first time, or maybe even if it's the second or third time you've texted me, let me know who you are, just to make sure. Because if I don't have you in my contacts list, I may not know. So I would ask for that help. Um, anyway, let's get down to it. Today is chapter 9, and it's a great chapter and lots of good stuff in here. I'll try to keep some of my comments brief because I got to save some stuff for future sermons, right? Anyway, so chapter 9. Jesus called the 12 together, and he gave them power and authority over all demons and to heal sickness. He sent them out to proclaim God's kingdom and to heal the sick. He told them, "Take nothing for the journey, no walking stick, no bag, no bread, no money, not even an extra shirt. Whatever house you enter, remain there until you leave that place. Wherever they don't welcome you, as you leave that city, shake the dust off your feet as a witness against them." They departed and went through the villages, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. We're going to pause there for a moment. Jesus tells them, don't take any of this extra stuff. Different reasons why, or different things we could kind of assume why. One is the importance of the mission and the need for speed. The need for speed. The more stuff you take with you, or first of all, the more time you take to pack, uh, the longer it's going to take before you start your mission, and it's going to cut into your trip time. Okay. Uh, Second, the more stuff you carry, the harder it's going to be. We're not loading up an SUV and driving through towns. Whatever they take, they're going to have to carry. So the more stuff you carry, the harder your journey is going to be. Just ask anybody who does a lot of hiking. Um, we had a gentleman stay with us for a couple days who was walking on the hiking the Appalachian Trail, and weight and stuff like that is a concern. Is a concern. He tried to reduce the amount of weight that he carried, so he took things out of all their packaging as much as he could, and put things inside of others and squeezed it in, and just to try to lighten the load. So Jesus is telling his disciples, don't take anything with you. So maybe it's one of those two things. It's the need for speed. We need to get this mission started as soon as possible. So don't waste time packing. You need to be able to move quickly and easily. Don't take a lot of stuff with you. The third thing is this might have been just a brief trip, a brief trip. It may have even only been one day. He's just sending them out because they come right back. We're going to read about that. So, and Luke doesn't give us, how much time has elapsed, and he often does talk about the elapsing of time, and it's sometimes he says soon after this, but a lot of times he'll give numbers of days, which we will get to. But this time he doesn't. He just says they leave, and then he says they come on back. Yes, Susan Alice, you are in my contacts list. um, so he tells them, don't take anything, just go. They departed and went through the villages, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. Okay. Herod the ruler, yours may say Herod the Tetrarch, which was a kind of ruler, heard about everything that was happening. He heard all these news about Jesus. Maybe he's also hearing about what the disciples are doing. He was confused because some people were saying that John had been raised from the dead, others that Elijah had appeared, and still others that one of the ancient prophets had come back to life. Herod said, I beheaded John, so now who am I hearing about? Herod wanted to see him. Pause. Now, the last time we heard about John, well, we heard two things about John. Herod put him in prison, ending his ministry, right? Luke wanted to make that clear. John's ministry is over. And then we had John sending some of his disciples to go see Jesus and talk to him, saying, are you the one, or should we be waiting for somebody else? And then Luke says here, talks about his death. And people are saying, oh, maybe he's come back to life. And Herod said, wait a minute, I killed him. I beheaded this guy. So who is this? He doesn't believe it's John come back to life. He believes it's somebody else. He said John's dead. John's gone. Luke doesn't give us the story of how the story of John's execution. Matthew and Mark both share that story with the beheading and the dancing and Herodias's daughter asking for his head. Luke doesn't share that. He doesn't share that story, even though Mark, he would have been familiar with that story because Mark wrote it down first. Anyway, for whatever reason, he didn't want to. He didn't include it. Maybe it's because he wants to keep that ministry separate and apart. No need to continue to talk about John. We're talking about Jesus here. Is kind of what Luke is saying. I think anyway. I think that's why he left that story out. But in Herod, there's no confusion in Herod's mind. John's gone. This isn't John. This isn't John. This is somebody else. And Herod wanted to see him. Luke says Herod wanted to see him. That's a short little verse there. Herod wanted to see him. Only five words in the Common English Bible translation that I'm using. But that foreshadows something because this is chapter 9, in 14 more chapters, in chapter 23, Herod's going to have his chance to see Jesus. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's almost as like foreshadowing that part of the story. Herod wanted to see him. Herod wanted to see him. When the apostles returned, again, doesn't say how soon after, might have been just the same day, they described for Jesus what they had done. Taking them with him, Jesus withdrew privately to a city called Bethsaida. So he wanted to take his disciples away, give them a break, maybe continue the debrief on their mission exploits, and give them a chance to recharge. That's what he wanted to do too. But he wanted to do this privately. When the crowds figured it out, they followed him. He welcomed them, spoke to them about God's kingdom, and healed those who were sick. So even though Jesus was looking for this chance to kind of get away, a little bit of peace and quiet, be with the disciples, talk about their ministry, give them and him a chance to recharge. People were pushing in on him, and he said, that's fine. Come here. When the day was almost over, the 12 came to him and said, Send the crowds away so that they can go to the nearby villages and countryside and find lodging and food because we are in a deserted place. He replied, You give them something to eat. But they said, We have no more than 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all these people. They said this because about 5,000 men were present. When they talk about fish and bread, we're not talking uh, 20, 30 pound, or I'm sorry, 200-pound tunas here. We're talking a couple um, gefilte fish, perhaps. Something small and salted, dried, preserved in some way. And when they talk about loaves of bread, we're not talking about a giant loaf of sunbeam or king size loaf of bread that you would pick up in the market. A loaf of bread was little more than a dinner roll. So this is a person's lunch. Jesus said to his disciples, Seat them in groups of about 50. They did so, and everyone was seated. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looked up to heaven, blessed them and broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. Everyone ate until they were full, and the disciples filled 12 baskets with the leftovers. Pause. No, this is the only miracle that all 4 of the gospels recount. Okay, it's the only miracle that appears in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and in John. Um, there are miracles that appear in Matthew and Luke. There are miracles that appear in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and now that kind of arrangements. And there are some that overlap into John. There are also some miracles that are specific only to particular gospels. But this miracle is the only one that all 4 tell the story of. Mostly same details, couple little differences perhaps in it. Now, sometimes the differences are important because each gospel author, each of these biographers, has an intent, a purpose in why they're writing, what they're writing, and who they're writing to. And sometimes those intents, those purposes, can be found in some of the differences in the details of the story. Now, this miracle is truly amazing. It's over 5,000 in Luke's translation is specific men. So with women and children were there, we could be easily talking, well over 10, 15,000, perhaps as many as 20,000 individuals. Hard to say, nobody knows, that kind of thing. And there have been lots of conversations over this. Was it a literal, did Jesus feed all of them just with those things? There was a movement of a more of a different kind of understanding that the miracle was that everyone shared what food they had. That there was more than just the 5 loaves and 2 fish, but that was one person's lunch, and somebody else shared what they had, and it turned out that they had enough to feed everybody when they shared what they had. Which truly, that's also a miracle, is it not? That they would be willing to share what they had when they didn't have much to make it. Doesn't matter. To me, I believe that it truly was a miracle that Jesus made this happen out of just those 5 loaves and 2 fish. But let's put that part aside for a moment and try to look at something else that's taking place here. Um, Luke, again, this could be a sense of foreshadowing, especially for Luke, in foreshadowing Jesus's death. That he took this small amount of material, bread and fish, to feed this large group of people. In a way, is foreshadowing, yes, Jesus' Last Supper with the disciples when he says, "This is my body, this is my blood," and then with his sacrifice on the cross being enough of a sacrifice, not just for one person, not just for one group of people, but for everyone in the world for all time. Okay, so just an interesting, I think, interesting way to think about this, rather than just concentrating on the miracle and thinking about what does it mean beyond that. Back to the story. Sorry, this one's turning into a long one, but that's, like I said, this is good stuff in this chapter. Once, when Jesus was praying by himself, the disciples joined him, and he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They answered, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others that one of the ancient prophets has come back to life." He asked them, and what about you? Who do you say that I am? Ooh, sort of a little test by the master, eh? Peter answered, "The Christ, sent from God." Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell this to anyone. He said, "The human one must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the legal experts, and be killed and be raised on the third day." Jesus said to everyone, "All who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. All who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me will save them. What advantage do people have if they gain the whole world for themselves, yet perish or lose their lives? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the human one, will be ashamed of that person when he comes in his glory, and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. I assure you that some standing here won't die before they see God's kingdom." So we're going to pause. Lots of stuff. I probably should have paused earlier in that passage too. So Peter answered, "You're the Christ sent from God." The Christ sent from God. Now, the word Christ is, like an English translation of the Greek word Christos, which literally means anointed one. It itself is basically a translation of an older Hebrew word, uh, Meshiach, from which we translate to the word Messiah, which means anointed one. It means anointed one. And it goes back to the ancient Hebrew tradition of anointing of the chosen individuals who would be the priests in the temple, and prophets, and the kings were were anointed by some of the prophets. Samuel anointed David to be king, that kind of stuff. Um, so Peter says, "You're the Christ sent from God," and that would have been a lower T, like just a Christ sent from God. Not quite sure what's going on. But Jesus, in following this up and talking about what's going to happen, uh, which we can talk about that some other time too, as far as I don't think Jesus was sent to die on the cross. I think that's just what happened because of who he was, because humans couldn't handle him in any other way than dead. Um, and we'll talk about that. But Jesus says that all this stuff is going to be happening to show them that the Christ, that he is the Christ, not just a Christ, and entirely different than any of the Christ's, Messiah's chosen anointed ones that they would have known in the past. That they would have known in the past. The other thing I want to point out is it says about 3 days. He's going to be killed and be raised on the third day. Um, kind of forgot it was in this part. I was thinking that was only in the end. Jesus died on Friday and was raised on Sunday, right? Which my way of counting and our way of counting is only 2 days, right? Because it's Saturday. He died on Friday, so it's Saturday, Sunday, right? The way they counted time back then, they counted starting with the day they were in. That's why we get 3 days. So it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, even though it was later on Friday. So it's not like it was a whole day on Friday, and it was very early on Sunday. So Jesus was in the tomb for less than 48 hours, folks. But that's why you get three. That's why it is here. Um, okay, so now I say that because in this very next verse starts with about 8 days after Jesus said these things. In other words, it's 1 week later. Okay, uh, we say a week has 7 days in it, right? But counting today means that a week from now is 8 days. We don't count that way. They did then. I know some people might still count that way, have trouble figuring out those things. That's the way they counted days back in the first century, but we don't count that way anymore. So when it says 8 days, he means a week. About 8 days after Jesus said these things, he took Peter, John, and James and went up on a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes flashed white like lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, were talking with him. How did they know it was Moses and Elijah, right? Um, there weren't photographs or even paintings of what Moses and Elijah looked like. All right, uh, they're symbolic. They're symbolic. Moses would be symbolic of the law, and Elijah is symbolic of the prophets. So everything, the law and the prophets, the law and the prophets, that would be like everything from the Bible and stuff like that. We're talking with Jesus. They were clothed with heavenly splendor and spoke about Jesus' departure, which he would achieve in Jerusalem. In other words, his death and resurrection. Peter and those with him were almost overcome by sleep, but they managed to stay awake and saw his glory as well as the two men with him. As the two men were about to leave, Moses and Elijah, as the two men were about to leave Jesus, Peter said to him, Master, it's good that we're here. We should construct 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. But he didn't know what he was saying. Peter had a habit of speaking before thinking, one of those kind of things. Tongue works faster than the brain. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. He was so overcome by this. But also, in a way, he was trying to capture that moment. You might almost say he was trying to capture Moses, Elijah, and Jesus to hold them in that moment, in that time. Perhaps he was still scared by what Jesus had said about having to die. Peter was still speaking when a cloud overshadowed them. As they entered the cloud, they were overcome with awe. Then a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. Even as the voice spoke, Jesus was found alone. They were speechless, and at the time told no one what they had seen. It is shared later. I think Peter, in particular, writes about it in the Bible. The next day, when Jesus, Peter, John, and James had come down from the mountain, a large crowd met Jesus. A man from the crowd shouted, Teacher, I beg you to take a look at my son, my only child. Um, Again, only child would be the only way this person would live past their death is through your children. And if his child died, um, he would he would have no eternity because they didn't understand any, eternal life or anything like that. That really wasn't a concept yet. Also, the fact that he would end up losing, his family's inheritance, it would go to somebody else. Look, a spirit seizes him, and without any warning, he screams. It shakes him and causes him to foam at the mouth. It tortures him and rarely leaves him alone. I begged your disciples to throw it out, but they couldn't. Luke doesn't say it's a demon. He says it's a spirit. And in a couple of verses, he even uses the phrase unclean spirit. Sounds very similar to an epileptic seizure. Okay. And it's okay for us to think that that's really what it was. Again, first century medicine may not have understood that. It doesn't make the healing any less miraculous to think that it was epilepsy rather than a demon. Jesus answered, You faithful and crooked generation, how long will I be with you and put up with you? Bring your son here. While he was coming, the demon threw him down and shook him violently. He does say demon there, but most of the time he says spirit, unclean spirit. Jesus spoke harshly to the unclean spirit, healed the child, and gave him back to his father. Everyone was overwhelmed by God's greatness. Again, think of it as epilepsy, and it's still a miraculous healing event, correct? To take this away. And he's giving the child back to the father, back to his father. And he could be part of the family. While everyone was marveling at everything he was doing, Jesus said to his disciples, Take these words to heart. The human one is about to be delivered into human hands. They didn't understand this statement. Its meaning was hidden from them, so they couldn't grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. An argument arose among the disciples about which of them was the greatest. Aware of their deepest thoughts, so apparently they weren't loud enough for him to hear, Jesus took a little child and had the child stand beside him. Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever welcomes this child in my name welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever is least among you all is the greatest." John replied, "Master, we saw someone throwing demons out in your name, and we tried to stop him because he isn't in our group of followers." But Jesus replied, "Don't stop him, because whoever isn't against you is for you." We're going to pause there for a moment. So Jesus is dealing with their egos through this whole thing, even though there's a couple different things taking place. It's all ego driven. Uh, the disciples have the human understanding of hierarchy and who is the most powerful, who is the greatest, and that kind of thing. And Jesus is showing them that that's not how it is. That's not how it is. Whoever is like a child, perhaps in their understanding of faith and their love, their joy of life. Seriously, right? You watch a child, they're just joyful. You would see them about everything. I would also say, especially with a child, until they're raised differently, there's no hatred. They seem to love just about everybody and everything. Um, until we teach them hate, until we teach them how to hate. And so whoever is least among you all is the greatest. So he's showing them that the way God looks at things is upside down compared to human understanding. Although perhaps I should just say human understanding is upside down compared to how it should be, compared to how God understands it. And also the fact that they were trying to, it's also ego driven, them wanting to stop somebody else from doing amazing things because they wanted to be the only ones doing it. They want to be the only ones doing it. As the time approached when Jesus was to be taken up into heaven, he determined to go to Jerusalem. He had to go to Jerusalem, had to go to the special city. He sent messengers on ahead of him. Along the way, they entered a Samaritan village to prepare for his arrival. But the Samaritan villagers refused to welcome him because he was determined to go to Jerusalem. It wasn't the fact that he was Jewish or or anything, because they'd probably heard these stories about Jesus and they were willing to talk with him and be with him. But the fact that he just was just passing through, that he was determined to go to Jerusalem, where the Jews thought was the holy city, versus what they thought as a holy city, that's what kind of was the stopper on it. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to consume them?" But Jesus turned and spoke sternly to them, and they went on to another village. As Jesus and his disciples traveled along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens, and the birds in the sky have nests, but the human one has no place to lay his head." In other words, discipleship, following me, is not easy. Okay? It's not easy to be a Christ follower. It wasn't in the first century when Jesus was alive, and we shouldn't think that it's going to be easy now in the 21st century. Then Jesus said to someone else, "Follow me." He replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and spread the news of God's kingdom." Pause. We don't even know if the guy actually was dead. So this person that Jesus is calling to come be a follower is kind of putting it off. Let me finish taking care of business. Let me wait until my father dies. Which is what's going to happen when my father dies? I get my inheritance. Let me take care of that kind of stuff. Then I'll come follow you. Someone else said to Jesus, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say goodbye to those in my house." Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand on the plow and looks back is fit for God's kingdom." Ooh, little bit harsh, a little bit harsh there, Jesus. He has some harsh tones. But again, it's because this person is trying to delay things, and is putting earthly concerns ahead of the message about God's kingdom. Kind of ties back into when the beginning of that chapter when Jesus sends the disciples out and says, "Don't take anything with you." He sends out the 12 apostles. Don't take anything with you. Like we were saying, it's that need for speed. It's too important. We need to do this now. Well, folks, that's the end of chapter 9 and just over 30 minutes. Sorry about that. But again, if you need to catch up on any of these, they are still available here on Facebook. They are available also on YouTube and on our YouTube channel and also on our website, umcchrist.org. Uh, this one won't be yet. This will be later today. This one will be showing up there. And if you find these worthwhile, consider sharing them with some of your friends, letting others know as well. We can consider this to be a an opportunity for evangelism and an opportunity to spread God's message, this good news of the kingdom of God. Anyway, folks, have a blessed day, and I will see you tomorrow.